it. And once again, this is Guts at his most nihilistic. But to get into the story, so we're introduced at first, for the first time, to the Holy Iron Chain Knights, led by Connor's one and only Miss Farnese, Lady Farnese, a member of the, I think they're called the Vandaminian family from the Holy City. They are the ceremonial army force of the Holy See, who are based in the Holy City, and they seemed very much to just be like mostly a one for one for the Vatican and the Catholic Church.
She's a blonde trad calf with daddy issues. Many such
And
cases.
she's a complete larper who actually doesn't believe anything that she says she does.
Total sexual degenerate.
Yeah.
Yeah, never known any like that.
Yeah, just Connor's type, really. Many such cases. um, so we're introduced to them right after the eclipse, and then we get the flash. It's kind of a flashback, and then we jump straight into Lost Children. But the world is starting. Everybody saw the eclipse happen, and everybody wondered what it meant. So they were sent out to try and investigate the circumstance of why that was, and they come across the remains of the Band of the Hawk in the large pool of water that the eclipse occurred in, and you just got blood and guts everywhere. And they, for the rest of the story, until they finally meet with Guts, are on Guts's trail because they're following these tales of the Black Swordsman, the man who, wherever they go, there's been supernatural events that they've heard from the locals, and there's always a pile of corpses. We can presume as well that in their travels they found the Count and what happened to the city the Count was in. I don't think they ever mention exactly what the name of that place is, but they probably find the weird serpent guy from the very first tale. They find the remains of the Count, and they probably spoke to Theresia, found that she'd just been completely traumatized by the entire situation. And this is where they first find. So they're assuming that Guts is some brutal murderer who probably doesn't, they don't necessarily think he has supernatural abilities, but they think that because of how terrifying and fearsome he is, or perhaps he exists as the leader of a band, that people are exaggerating the story somewhat. Because magic was reintroduced for the most part into the world by the eclipse, it seems. It's something that only started to come back. I think it's the night of festivities when all of the demons begin and the apostles begin to return for the sake of being in attendance at the eclipse. This world, despite the fact that you have this gigantic religious establishment of the Holy See that say that they believe in all of these supernatural things, because realistically, that's what gods and spirits are. They are something supernatural outside of our perceived existence. They don't really, for the most part, because they've been so disconnected from it. I mean, Puck speaks about it later on when they meet up with Farnese, but he, being an elf, is a supernatural being. And he says that when you go to the large cities, like the Holy City, where he says that he's been, and you go to these large cathedrals, people can't perceive it because they can't perceive the magic in the world around them anymore the way that they used to. He says you don't get that problem if you go to the villages. Normally, people working at rural churches, priests in these little villages, can perceive him just fine. But the fact that these larger religious establishments are more bureaucratized, you could say, they've taken the spiritual humanity out of it. And that seems to be reflective of the rest of the world. But now the magic is being reintroduced and people just can't handle it.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on this. What
Yeah.
you're describing is essentially what C.S. Lewis said about an abolition of man, of where if you hollow out the sensibilities, the religious convictions, the metaphysical tethers that people have across generations, and you create generations of chestless men for whom religious identity is either a skin suit or it's an antiquated ideal or it's just a prophecy abstracted that they then encounter the Knights of the Holy See when they stumble across the aftermath of the eclipse. And the myth making that is engaged with Guts is because they spend 2 years pursuing him, only ever picking up elements of his trail while the demons are re-emerging into the world. And I think the reason the demons can re-emerge into the world, and this is something that I believe he was the Pope's lead exorcist, but he released an autobiography and a book on exorcisms with Ignatius Press. And I had a flick through. It's very interesting reading. And one of the things that he says is that habitual vice puts you in a spiritually impoverished position that makes you an empty vessel prime for demonic possession. So
Mm.
it suppresses the power of your soul and it it makes it so that a demon can just inhabit your body. And though even though you're not
And we see a lot of that throughout this story. And there are some who can struggle against it, like Guts almost gets possessed a number of times and struggles against it. But most people just, second the demon comes near them, they get possessed.
Yeah, and if the cultural suppositions of the world are metaphysically and morally bereft, then that means the demons have fertile soil from which to emerge. And even though it is not your fault, if you do something while under the influence of demonic possession, like a murder or rape, for example, it is your fault for having been habitually in the position where you've exercised vice and a deficit of virtue to the extent of where you are prime for that possession. And that is something that the Holy See are at fault for here, because, and this is Lady Farnese's major flaw. A lot of her convictions, this is why she can't perceive Puck. This is why she's in the ability to be possessed later on when she approaches Guts naked and up for
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly. You know, again, many such cases.
Connor's been there before.
This is her fault because she doesn't truly believe the things that she stands for, and she's essentially a careerist going off of the legacy of her dad to fulfill that in her rights. So the world is
She's going through all of the motions. She even whips herself on her back so that she can pretend that I'm just prostrating myself for the sake of, oh, I've been so bad, I need punishment. I'm definitely not enjoying this.
I
But
can help you out with that,
she's
sweetheart.
definitely enjoying it.
But this is the great irony of Guts, and this is what positions these two, Guts and Griffith, as the parallel great men of history. Something that you said off air is that Guts, he's almost embodying the alchemical dictum of "from filth it will be found." He's born of a bloated corpse. He is assaulted as a child. He has all his walls up. He is very nihilistic, and gradually he is reclaiming that noble warrior spirit from the depths of a broken culture and a broken home. Whereas Griffith, in the inverse, looks perfect and is gradually falling throughout the Golden Age arc and becomes the chief disciple of the Dark God that's in the forgotten chapter. He is a great man in that he is of epochal prominence, but he's morally corrupted and he will plunge the rest of the world into darkness. So you have these antagonistic forces, and those forces can only war in a culture and a world who has not picked a side. And that is what Farnese embodies.
Okay, seeing as you've mentioned the two great men of history, shall we talk a little bit about chapter 83, the
Can do.
chapter that Miura has since decided he didn't want reprinted. He didn't want to be considered canon because it tied him down a little bit too much to events that might have to happen later on in the story. But I do think still does it informs some of the rest of the story as we see it. And as far as I'm aware from what I've read going forward and from what I've seen other people discuss online, nothing in the rest of the story really contradicts it. And we know that the idea of evil, that being the god that Griffith meets while he's going through the eclipse, is still canon because we do see a brief glimpse of it at the end of the chapter. Because there's the chapter where he's seeing everything that he had sacrificed up until that point so that he would be able to achieve the greatness that he does. And he's swirling through the darkness and the feelings and the thoughts of the masses. And then he comes across what looks like a giant band of flesh. And it was the chapter immediately after that where you see what that was and you see the discussion in chapter 83 that Miura later decided, no, I don't want this. But we read it anyway because, sorry, Miura, it sounded really interesting. And also, once again, if it doesn't contradict, I thought it would inform people. I've seen some people talk about this chapter as though, oh, all it does is really confirm things that we already knew. But I think, so it doesn't really matter. I don't know why he decided to make it non canon. I think I do, because it's not just the discussion that Griffith has in that situation with the idea of evil that's informative. It's also the visuals that are shown. I think because we find that the idea of evil what looks like a gigantic heart with valves taking in the swirling thoughts and feelings, and we see that the swirl that it's in is the same swirl that they end up in at the end of the Black Swordsman arc. So that connects all the way back to there, and we must assume that at the end of the Black Swordsman arc, that's the realm that they were in while Guts was trying to confront Griffith and the rest of the God Hand. But also, I think something very, very important is that you've got to notice that this giant heart has two spiraling helixes going down off of the base of the heart into the rest of the swirl. And the Holy See and their idol that they worship is the hawk, with what's coming off of the end of that, a swirling double helix going on underneath it. And so I think that this is an obvious and clear visual indication that these two things are connected. Either that the Holy See has misinterpreted what they are worshipping, and we do know that they are worshipping something that is real because they do have prophecies that line up. That's one of the reasons that the Holy Iron Chain Knights are after Guts in the first place, is because there has been a prophecy foretold that there will be, I think it's the Hawk of Darkness or the Wolf of Darkness, whatever they
I have
refer
it
to
here.
as
I
Guts.
So it is the angel is the hawk of darkness, the
Yeah,
master of the sinful black sheep, the king of the blind white sheep, and he shall call down upon the world an age of darkness.
that's it. Yeah, they think that they're following after the Hawk of Darkness being Guts and the Hawk of Light, because later on you get the dream at the beginning of the birth ceremony that everybody gets at the same time throughout all of Midland and throughout all the lands that we see, where they all get the same dream of the Hawk of Light. Everybody assumes that that's Griffith, but Griffith was only given that power through the idea of evil, which should be the inverse of what it is that they're referring to. So it could be perhaps that this prophecy, they've misinterpreted it and got it the wrong way around. And Guts is actually the Hawk of Light, even though he would not appear to be so to most people. But I think it suggests two things, because the image that you see of the idea of evil, the double helix is spiraling off into the distance and you don't see what's at the other end of it. Perhaps what's at the other end of it, if it does have a separate end, is the God that the Holy See are worshipping, which would be the idea of goodness, the idea of light, because they would be two different ends of a single spectrum, one of goodness and kindness, one of evil and darkness and malevolence. Or I think, and this would be very interesting because what the idea of evil tells Griffith is that he was manifested purely through the desire and necessity of people to have a reason for the suffering and the nihilism and the careless disasters that visit them in all of their lives, which is very interesting. That the idea is that there is some spiritual dimension that has all of their spirits and feelings and souls in it, but that uses them to manifest itself as its own God. So they create their own God. Very almost Nietzschean in the idea of the mass man creates what the mass man experiences. And thus, the idea of evil explains that it created Griffith to be some kind of leader for the mass man, for the people, going into to like not even necessarily to do anything in particular, because it explicitly tells Griffith, "Do as you will," which is very interesting.
Yeah, so I wish he'd kept this in because I actually think it really enriches the cosmology, and it
Oh, sorry. Can I just finish before you go any further? So I just want to be clear. So what I think could be the other answer is that essentially, if you're going through the idea of cyclical history, which we have been exploring recently, the age of iron, the age of man, as the people in the Berserk universe existed for a long time, is ending. And we're entering a new age of magic. You could call it a new age of heroes if you wanted to. And perhaps it is that going by cyclical history, because humanity cannot deal with that, they have created their own Caesar figure to bring them into this new world and guide them into a better world and guide them. And that would be what Griffith is. Griffith is the hero to be embodied as chosen by the people, by the peasants, by the desires of those who are suffering. Whereas Guts, opposite to that, and why it is that Guts, because it seems to be that there's a lot of determinism going on within this universe. The idea of evil wills something because it's the will of the people, and then it happens. Guts is the exact opposite of that. Guts is the stoic man by and for himself. He exists outside of the chain of causality, even though he once was part of it, and has managed to separate himself from that through pure, sheer strength of determination. He wasn't supposed to be alive. He should have been dead. He was born from a corpse. He constantly goes off on his own. He has problems with just abandoning people because he's willful and stubborn and is unwilling to go with the desires of those around him. He is the opposite of the mass man. He is the pure essence of the not atomized necessarily, but the strong and remarkable individual, which is why he both formed such a strong relationship with Griffith, because they're two sides of the same coin, but why he has to be opposite to him.
Yeah, so I think the chapter really enriches the cosmology in multiple ways. I believe that Mura probably intended the idea to be that the Holy See have misinterpreted the prophecy. That would be my bet. However, I do like the fact that they connect and they're symbiotic, and so they exist antagonistically with the hawk flying upwards to battle the bleeding heart, which drips downwards. And I like the actual positioning of these rather than the devil being at the bottom and God being at the top here, because it shows that in human nature, if this realm of the dark god is created by human desires, I can't remember exactly which theologian said it, but he conceptualized evil as what arises from the absence of good, like this culture, so the
Mm.
demons can reemerge from that fertile soil. If this realm is created by falling afoul of the line between good and evil that runs through the heart of every man, then actually that is the natural state. And instead, from a bottom up conscious exertion of the good, you have to fly upwards and try and transcend that. So you have to move from the telluric world of pleasures upwards towards the transcendent and invert that dichotomy. And I like the connection to cyclical history because I think the fact that this has become prophecy and a bureaucratized system of self-empowerment off of superstition, despite it being legitimate, is similar to Vico's idea of the age of barbarism, where the lightning struck and you interpreted that as a prophecy, and that spirit, that animating sublime principle, is what drives you to create civilization. And even though it is superstition and it's not properly understood, and we might chastise it as being backwards or barbaric, it is the spiritual bedrock that built great civilizations. And falling away from that from the generations impairs your ability to properly interpret that through myth because it becomes too literal or it becomes institutionalized. And that's what falls you into this era of complacency where the lords and the feudal masters and the kings are incestuous and predatory, as we keep seeing throughout this book.
Yep.
And that is the fertile soil from which demons can return.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.